In Chapter 1, Castile awakens in a bathing chamber, reflecting on the events that left him and Kieran unconscious beside Poppy, with Emile Delar, Delano, and Malik having managed the aftermath and covered for them. He senses a surge of primal essence within himself, realizing that the joining has transformed him and Kieran into more powerful beings, beyond their elemental Atlantean and Wolven natures, with ether visibly coursing through their bodies. After bathing and dressing Poppy, Castile notices Kieran and the Crown Guard commander, Hisa Famar, reporting a violent incident in the Lux, where Ascended were killed despite mortal soldiers' refusal to act against them. Kieran explains the instability among Ascended, the Blood Crown's remnants, and public distrust, urging Castile to witness the aftermath personally. Mounted on Seti with Emile and Hisa, Castile observes the city's unease, sensing danger, and narrowly avoids a Draken attack by Reaver. He recognizes urgent choices await regarding Callis the Ascended and lifting the curfew, all before Poppy awakens. In Chapter 2, Castile rides with Emile and Hisa to investigate multiple Ascended deaths in the Lux District, uncovering a disturbing and unnatural pattern. About a dozen Ascended were found drained of blood with fang marks on their throats, yet no signs of struggle or forced entry. Their homes' lights were destroyed, some lawns and flowers dead, and dead birds were found in one residence. Unlike other Ascended, these victims had no blood reserves, and their homes appeared otherwise normal, filled with books, art, and personal items. The phenomenon suggests a spirit-like or incorporeal being may be responsible. Returning to Wayfair, Castile consults Reaver, who reveals that Colas, the Primal of Death, could be moving unseen in a partial, shadow-like form and might require a vessel to regain full form. Castile pieces together that Isbeth may have planned to use Malik or Poppy as a vessel, connecting the Ascended deaths and Colas' potential return to her manipulations and schemes. In Chapter 3, Castile reacts violently after Poppy collapses and appears unresponsive, feeling a surge of ether and rage as he attacks Reaver, the Draken, fearing for her safety. Despite Reaver warning him, Castile struggles to control his fury, realizing Poppy is in extreme pain and her behavior is erratic. Her primal essence manifests unpredictably, displaying gold, silver, and crimson streaks across her eyes and body capable of deadly force. Castile works to calm her, discovering she experiences intense internal pain and fears harming others. Kieran arrives, sensing the danger and trying to stabilize the situation, while Reaver alerts them that the true Primal of Death, Colas, may be influencing Poppy. Poppy admits something within her compels her to hurt, prompting Kieran to reveal he promised to stop her if she lost control. He explains that stopping her could require placing her into a long-term stasis, a revelation that shocks Castile and drives him to attack Kieran in desperation. In Chapter 4, Castile attacks Kieran in a blind rage after learning Kieran promised to put Poppy into stasis if she lost control, feeling betrayed and hurt. Their violent confrontation is interrupted as Poppy attempts to leave the chamber, her primal essence flaring uncontrollably, capable of lethal force. Castile struggles to maintain control while Reaver and Kieran try to manage the situation. Poppy eventually collapses, trembling and in pain, revealing that something inside her compels her to potentially harm others. Castile and Kieran work to restrain and protect her, moving her to a secure cell while providing comfort, aware she may need to feed to stabilize. Reaver plans to seek guidance from Seraphina and other gods to understand Colas' influence. Castile grapples with the emotional fallout, betrayal, guilt, and anger at both Poppy and Kieran for withholding critical information while trying to prepare for Poppy's safe recovery and containment without further harm. In Chapter 5, Castile remains in the cell with Poppy while Malik, Emile, and Delano arrive, concerned about her condition and his actions. Castile explains Poppy has woken but doesn't fully remember who she is, so he moved her to safety. A ball of silver ether appears in the hall, and a primal god named Attis emerges, resembling Castile and Malik. Attis confirms Poppy has an attachment to Colas, the true Primal of Death who exploited her vulnerability while in stasis and weakened. Castile and Kieran recount Poppy's behavior and struggle to feed, noting Colas' influence through her. Attis explains that severing such a possession could kill her and offers to help, revealing a basalt vial containing Necta's blood as a potential solution. Castile, Kieran, and Atz prepare to enter Poppy's room to examine her for Colas' mark and contain the threat, aware she may resist and that her weakened state is critical to their plan. In Chapter 6, Castile and Kieran carefully tend to Poppy, who remains unconscious and weakened from Colus's possession. Her wrists are still bound, and she bears the crimson mark of death between her breasts placed by Colus. Attis, the primal god, guides them through the process of using Nectus's Draken blood, contained in a basalt vial, to sever Colus's influence without killing her. Castile restrains Poppy while Kieran pierces the vial with an ancient bone dagger, allowing the blood to burn through Attis's hand and reach Poppy, causing her intense pain and convulsions. The mark pulses and manifests serpentine forms, which Castile disperses. Once the process is complete, Poppy remains alive but exhausted. Attis explains the risks, noting her interrupted ascension left her vulnerable, and warns Castile that his bloodline and temper make him crucial to Poppy's survival and resistance against Colus. The chapter ends with Castile holding Poppy and preparing to care for her while Attis leaves. In Chapter 7, Poppy experiences a dreamlike vision, reliving memories of her parents' protection and guidance. She wanders through a smoky, unpleasant inn before being comforted by her father, who reassures her and explains her name's origin, emphasizing her connection to the Queen of the Gods. Poppy learns she must trust a guide to lead her to safety while her father and mother remain vigilant. Meanwhile, Castile confronts Reaver outside Poppy's chamber, restrained by Malik, warning him not to interfere. Reaver insists Poppy must wake to ensure Jadis' safety and reveals more Ascended have been found dead, drained of blood by Colus. Castile, frustrated and protective, forces Reaver to leave. After the confrontation, Castile discusses Poppy's vulnerability with Malik, noting the risk of Colus's influence. Malik reports the Shadow Temple search is complete with no sign of the Primal of Death, and hands Castile a message from Pensdirth marked with dried blood, signaling danger and urgency. In Chapter 8, Castile receives a blood-stained letter from Eldric Ashwood, declaring allegiance to the true king, and undermining Castile's claim to Solus. Signaling Ashwood has taken control of Pensdirth from Duke Goffrey Barrack. Malik explains Ashwood was part of Isbeth's inner circle, but sent away centuries ago, likely to secure cities. They discuss Isbeth's manipulations, Callum's hidden influence, and the danger posed by Ascended and Revenants. Castile orders Kieran to send a regiment to Pensdirth to secure the city peacefully, with their father leading forces to protect them from ambush. Malik notes tensions with their bloodline and the implications of Attis's visit. Back in Wayfair, Castile checks on Poppy, noting the roots growing around her protectively. Reaver confirms the roots shield her in stasis, which is maintained by her life force and the Ether. Castile reflects on Poppy's joining, realizing her stasis and vulnerability were caused by Draken blood and his own earlier mistakes, leaving him in anguish while ensuring her safety. In Chapter 9, Castile waits for his father to return from escorting the regiment through the Blood Forest. He reviews reports from Perry, detailing the plight of farming communities between Carcedonia and the Willow Plains, noting craven attacks, denied requests for protection, and starvation in Crofts Cross. Castile orders additional guards, farmland expansion, and surveys to prepare for Atlanteans migrating west. While reflecting on the past and his longing for a simpler life, Castile senses Kieran outside the chamber. After Kieran departs, Castile tends to Poppy, who remains in stasis. He prays to Seraphina, Queen of the Gods, for her awakening. A surge of primal power breaks her protective roots, and Poppy begins to regain consciousness. As she awakens, her chest rises, toes curl, and her fangs appear. Castile encourages her to feed, guiding her to his throat. Poppy drinks deeply, her other awakening, and begins to regain control of herself, signaling a crucial step in her recovery and the stabilization of her life force. In Chapter 10, Poppy regains consciousness after being in stasis for over 2 weeks and adjusts to her primal goddess state. She notices Castile's bruised throat from a Rev attack and realizes she had healed him through the joining while asleep, which deepened her stasis. The couple reconnects emotionally and physically, reaffirming their bond and trust. Poppy experiences the ether flowing through her, enhancing her senses and abilities, while Castile explains how her essence had manifested during stasis, including a surge of silver and shadow ether and heightened perception. Castile reassures her, clarifying the effects of the joining, the temporary strain it caused, and the safety measures taken during her absence. Poppy recalls fragmented memories of other visitors, Kieran, Delano, Emil, Tawny, and Millicent, who aided her while she was unconscious. The capital remains secure, with a lockdown and curfew to prevent unrest. Poppy senses a shift in the realms, hinting that powerful forces are awakening, signaling imminent danger despite her recovery. In Chapter 11, Poppy experiences a sudden shift in the realms, sensing a powerful, suffocating pull, which alarms Castile. He steadies her, and they reconnect, sharing the emotional intensity from her emergence from stasis. Poppy recalls fragments of her time in stasis, noting ether pulses and enhanced awareness, while Castile reveals that during her awakening, she had been active for about 2 days without memory, and that the joining had left her vulnerable. He confirms that while she slept, her power affected the ascension and allowed Colas, the true primal of death, to accompany her back into consciousness. They discuss the state of the capital and remaining threats, including revenants, ascended loyalists, and cities under the Blood Crown's influence. Poppy realizes she can sense essence in Castile and others, including the shadow and crimson ether radiating from him. The chapter ends with Castile revealing that Colas returned alongside Poppy, heightening the sense of imminent danger and urgency. In Chapter 12, Poppy processes the aftermath of her stasis and learns from Castile how Colas, the true primal of death, had marked her and attempted to control her through blood and ether. Despite his influence, she retained self-awareness, resisted feeding, and prevented Colas from harming Reaver, Kieran, or Castile. She had even used her ether instinctively to defend and manipulate her surroundings, including throwing Reaver and escaping the chamber, though without causing real damage. Castile confirms that the connection to Colas has been severed, with help from a primal ancestor, Addis. Poppy then senses extreme pain and fear from thousands of people, her ether responding automatically. She discovers a city under siege, witnessing earthquakes, collapsing structures, and ships in peril. Using her enhanced ether, she intervenes, dispersing debris and lifting a sinking vessel to safety. The chapter concludes with Poppy confronting the remaining chaos, realizing her newfound powers are instinctive, vast, and able to influence life or death events. In Chapter 13, Poppy struggles to save people from the collapsing city and river, using her ether to manipulate ships and debris. She senses an immensely powerful being, far stronger than anyone she's encountered, whose presence overwhelms her. The stranger, a fate named Aiden, restrains her ether and warns that she cannot save the people. The city's destruction is inevitable. He reveals knowledge of her visions and her connection to the balance of life and death, hinting at the consequences of her recent ascension as a true primal of life. Meanwhile, the city falls into chaos, with collapsing bridges, buildings, and rivers, and a massive ancient rises from the water, growing wings and absorbing essence. Castile observes from afar, restrained by Aiden's power. Realizing Poppy faces overwhelming threats alone. Aiden explains that her ascension has freed Colas and destabilized the balance of the realms, with Penelope as the harbinger and Colas as the great conspirator, starting a countdown toward widespread destruction. In Chapter 14, Poppy awakens from a vivid, apocalyptic vision of widespread destruction caused by awakened ancients, witnessing death, fire, and the collapse of lands and cities. She finds herself in Elysium, where Victor appears alive and explains that some array, including Fates, are monitoring her because of the immense power she possesses as a primal of blood and bone. Victor reassures her, acknowledges her growth and choices, and clarifies his past actions to protect her during Duke Tierman's lessons. Poppy learns that her ascension and connection to the Essence could have caused catastrophic consequences if unchecked, but Holland, a Fate and Ancient, intervened to prevent her from acting recklessly. Lyrian explains that Poppy's powers are currently bound as a precaution, and that her husband, Castile, was similarly prevented from shadow-stepping into danger. Poppy realizes the balance of power is delicate, her presence and abilities are unprecedented, and both she and Castile are now closely monitored to prevent further destabilization. In Chapter 15, Poppy confronts Holland and Lyrian, disputing their assumptions about Castile's character and her own actions. She asserts she would prevent unnecessary loss of life, but would still risk everything if necessary, while Holland explains her presence beyond the veil was due to the awakening and her unique essence. Poppy learns that her powers, and those of her husband Castile, are unprecedented. She is a dominion, a being descended from Seraphina, a Demise, and 2 primals, making her a fully ascended primal without a court. Holland and Lyrian clarify that unbound primals like her Castile and others are extremely powerful and capable of shaping realms, and that courts are a system of control to stabilize ascended beings. They explain that the ancients and Aerie maintain balance, and that while primals can ascend, those without a court are rare and dangerous, with their decisions and powers carrying massive consequences across mortal and divine realms. In Chapter 16, Poppy confronts the Array, Holland, Lyrian, and Thorn, over their inaction regarding Colas and the awakened ancients. She learns that her birth and ascension disrupted the balance, triggering Colas' consciousness and the awakening of other ancients, though their unrest may have begun long before. Holland and Lyrian explain that her role as a Dominion and unbound primal gives her unprecedented power, and her existence is central to stopping Colas, a primal of a court seeking to absorb her essence to become the primal of blood and bone. The Array reveal they cannot intervene directly due to their rules, though they acknowledge the danger Colas poses. Poppy witnesses Lyrian attempt to attack her, but Thorn intervenes. Holland emphasizes her responsibility. Only she can stop Colas, liberate death, and prevent further destruction. Poppy accepts that she must act. Understanding her powers will be fully unbound upon returning to the mortal realm, setting the stage to confront Colas. In Chapter 17, Castile anxiously waits for Poppy to return from beyond the primal veil, reflecting on the knowledge she gained there and the deaths she experienced. He struggles with guilt and fear for her safety, knowing the ancients have awakened and the Array cannot intervene. Poppy returns through a tear in the realm, visibly bruised from a fate's attack. She explains the events she witnessed in the continents: vast cities, flying metal vehicles, and catastrophic destruction caused by the awakening of an ancient. She recounts that Holland and Thorn prevented her from interfering in the disaster, emphasizing the limits imposed by the Array. Poppy reveals the first ancient's stirring coincided with the pain she felt, and that the awakened ancients, Unia Eta Aram, ruin and wrath, pose a major threat. She describes the prophecy marking her as the Harbinger, the bringer of death and destruction, while Colas is identified as the great conspirator, highlighting their intertwined destinies and the looming danger across realms. In Chapter 18, Castile and Poppy discuss the consequences of her ascension and the creation of the Dominion primal gods. Poppy explains that splitting her abilities between Castile and Kieran created a new pantheon, making them true primals without ties to a court. Their presence in the mortal realm doesn't inherently affect mortals, but with Colas active, their existence contributes to imbalance. Castile confirms the sun now rises in the west, a sign of this growing disruption. They explore the powers they've gained, including Castile's ability to sense Poppy and communicate through the Notum, and Kieran's latent abilities as a primal of life. Poppy recounts the deaths she felt and how she shadow-stepped into the continents to witness and survive the disaster. She reassures Castile she is physically unharmed, though the emotional weight remains. The chapter concludes with Castile, Poppy, and Kieran navigating their new primal powers, the bond between them, and the lingering tensions surrounding what they witnessed and what remains hidden from them. In Chapter 19, Poppy explains to Kieran that the ancients awakened due to her ascension, which disrupted the balance. They discovered multiple ascended dead in the Lux, drained of blood, along with any living creatures in or near the homes. Kieran confirms that Colas can feed on those he created, including ascended and revenants, allowing him to regain corporeal form. The extent of his power remains uncertain, but he is potentially fully corporeal. Poppy realizes her sister Millicent's whereabouts are unknown, raising concern for her safety. The chapter details the strategic and logistical situation. The Blood Crown has roughly 50,000 soldiers remaining, with Royal Knights' numbers unclear. Pensdirth is under threat, and forces are being positioned to protect key cities like Whitebridge, Oak Ambler, and Macedonia. The leadership, including Generals Sear and Lasir, must be deployed cautiously to defend territory. Poppy, Kieran, and Castile coordinate plans, while acknowledging Colas' unpredictable and dangerous nature. In Chapter 20, Poppy, Kieran, and Castile discuss the Ascended and what must be done with them. Many Ascended lack blood stockpiles, leaving them vulnerable to bloodlust and craven transformation, but no exceptions are known. Poppy resolves they cannot be saved and must be quietly eliminated to prevent further suffering, taking full responsibility for the decision. They also plan a public appearance to reassure the people, though the populace remains unaware of Colas, the Ancients, or Seraphina. Colus's intentions are revealed. He seeks to become the true primal of life and death, requiring Poppy's essence to do so, posing a grave threat to the mortal realm and beyond. A Draken, Reaver, arrives, confirming his allegiance and readiness to assist Poppy, while noting that Nectus must still be alive. Reaver requests Poppy's help to free Jadis, signaling an imminent mission. Strategic and mystical threats converge as Poppy assumes her role fully awake and active. In Chapter 21, Poppy, Castile, and Reaver prepare to free Jadis, who has entombed herself beneath Ironspire. Jadis is weakened and encased in Shadowstone, her small form and bound wings evident. Reaver explains that he could not release her safely, so Poppy must use her touch to awaken her as she had with Nectus. Despite hesitation and uncertainty, Poppy begins to channel ether through her hands to break the chains, though the process is slow. The chamber is dark, silent, and filled with remnants of past occupants, heightening the tension. Castile and Reaver guide and support her, providing reassurance while warning of potential dangers. Poppy struggles with frustration and self-doubt as her Videntia offers no guidance, and Reaver's concern emphasizes the risk. The chapter ends with Poppy stepping back temporarily, while Reaver remains beside Jadis, highlighting the severity of the damage wrought by Isbeth and the urgency of restoring Jadis to safety. In Chapter 22, Castile leaves Poppy in their new quarters, while he attends to other duties, instructing her to explore the bathing chamber. Poppy examines the king's solar and adjoining rooms, noting their Atlantean design and opulent furnishings, including a large canopy bed, a spacious tub with heated water, and a walk-in wardrobe containing weapons and daggers, including her bloodstone and bone daggers capable of killing a primal. She reflects on her past, including the blood exchange with Colus and memories of trauma, but resolves to focus on the present and her responsibilities. As she prepares for a bath, she senses Kieran nearby and uses her ether to confirm his location. Poppy's awareness of threats heightens as she senses movement and a cool breeze from a cracked window, but finds no one present. She immerses herself in the tub, aware of the need to regain composure and strength for upcoming duties, including meeting with the generals. In Chapter 23, Poppy finishes bathing when Kieran enters the room, prompting a tense but intimate interaction as they discuss the new quarters, the joining, and the bond it created between them. Poppy reflects on the prismatic embroidery on Kieran's tunic, connecting it to the ancients and ether, and discusses the responsibilities and balance of her powers as a primal god with him. The conversation addresses the complexities of controlling ether, the split between life and death essences, and the challenge of managing mortals' lives. Castile returns, confirming he fed on Emil and emphasizing that he won't risk feeding on Poppy yet. The three discuss planning for the upcoming meeting with the generals, the uncertain status of Colus and his potential return to physical form, and how to prepare for his threat. Poppy wrestles with unease about sensing Colus's presence and the potential danger posed by his Vela, reinforcing the urgency to strategize before confronting him. In Chapter 24, Poppy, Castile, and Kieran discuss the threat posed by Colus and the potential of his Vela, realizing that he could project his will nearly limitlessly, making him extremely dangerous, especially up close. They strategize for confronting him, noting the two ways a primal can be killed: by another mature primal wielding true life or death essence, or by an unknown method Poppy's faulty Videntia cannot clarify. They agree to first confirm Colus's location, likely in Pensdirth, and assess his army before taking action, emphasizing the need to weaken him using ancient bone or essence from a powerful primal. Poppy senses Delano in the chamber and reconnects with him, reassured by his presence and the loyalty of other allies. Emil arrives, revealing multiple deaths in Stonehill, creating urgency. The chapter establishes the stakes of Colus's threat, the limitations and potential of their powers, and the immediate need to plan and act strategically. In Chapter 25, Castile, Poppy, Kieran, Delano, Emil, Malik, Perry, and Nail travel to Stonehill to investigate a mass death incident. During preparations, Poppy discovers that Seti, her horse, is actually a bloodsteed, a vessel containing the essence of the primal god Ats, and not a normal horse. The group notes Seti's unusual resilience in battle and surmises a connection to Poppy and her ancestry. Upon entering Stonehill, they find multiple bodies, including about 50 mortals, 15 of whom are children under 10. All victims appear to have inflicted their own deaths using improvised or household items with no signs of struggle. Poppy senses that the killings were influenced not by the victims' own wills, but by Colas, the Primal of Death, whose power permeates the area. The chapter establishes the scale and supernatural cause of the Stonehill Massacre, the revelation of Seti's true nature, and the urgent threat posed by Colas to mortals and the team. In Chapter 26, Poppy, Castile, Kieran, Malik, Nail, Perry, Emil, and Delano continue investigating the Stonehill Massacre. Poppy recounts her memory of being in a cage during stasis, confronted by Colas, who tried to manipulate her by offering false peace and forcing her to relive past traumas. She realizes his compulsion could influence mortals and Wolven, but not Atlanteans, confirming the threat he poses. They examine multiple homes where victims had died, noting that the dead, including children, appear to have killed themselves, likely under Colas' influence. Poppy struggles with the horror and anger, while Castile reminds her not to bear guilt. Returning to the homes, they observe unsettling changes. Some bodies twitch and their skin turns gray or blackened, suggesting a prelude to Craven transformation, though no feeding occurred. The chapter ends with a little girl's eyes opening, indicating the victims are not entirely dead and revealing Colas' continued manipulations and the supernatural danger still active in Stonehill. In Chapter 27, Poppy, Castile, Kieran, Nail, Perry, Emil, Malik, and Delano face the Ghouls, reanimated, God-created corpses behaving violently. A little girl attacks Malik, biting his arm, revealing the Ghouls' strength and unnatural resilience. Castile, Nail, and Kieran intervene, subduing her and clarifying that the Ghouls are not mortal, akin to Craven or Germs, used by gods to hunt or feed on spiritual flesh. Poppy witnesses the chaos, helping defend herself and others with her bloodstone sword and other, rapidly dispatching multiple Ghouls. She also heals Malik's wound using her essence. The Ghouls display coordinated, unnatural behavior, indicating they are directed by Colas, who manipulates them with his will. Poppy senses the divine and malevolent control behind the attacks, culminating when an elderly Ghoul's eyes reveal Colas' presence. The chapter ends with the Ghoul taunting Poppy and Castile, signaling Colas' direct involvement and escalating the threat against them in Stonehill. In Chapter 28, Poppy and Castile reflect on Colas' intentions and the implications of his attacks in Stonehill. Castile realizes that Colas specifically targeted Poppy, calling her Solus, my soul, and believes he desires her essence of life and death. Poppy contemplates Colas' obsession, theorizing that it predates his release and that his follower Callum may have provided insight. Castile vows to protect Poppy and confront Colas, acknowledging that as a Dominion Primal of Death, he can oppose the true Primal. Poppy experiences residual other effects from her rage, but calms herself to protect Poppy and maintain control. Later, a council of generals meets at Wayfair to strategize. Poppy clarifies Colas' role as the true Primal of Death and the threat he poses, emphasizing that the Ascended are not responsible. They agree to gather intelligence on Colas' state and forces, delaying direct engagement. Poppy asserts that any action against Colas must be coordinated with Castile and Kieran, underscoring their need to act together for success. In Chapter 29, Poppy and Castile spend a morning in the Solar discussing plans for Ascended training, the Shadowstone dagger, and Kieran's absence. Poppy reveals she cannot use her Bloodstone dagger after learning it was crafted from Prila's bones and witnessing it kill Delano. Their conversation explores trust, honesty, and the changes Poppy feels after her own ascension. Delano interrupts to announce a visitor, Tawny, Poppy's friend, who arrives unexpectedly. Despite initial dread, Poppy embraces Tawny, sensing her altered state due to previous Shadowstone wounds and the influence of Poppy's powers. Tawny recounts her perilous journey to the capital, the dangers she faced, and her connection to Poppy's awakenings, noting she felt Poppy's presence both times she woke. Later, Malik arrives to discuss crown business, prompting Poppy and Castile to reflect on the soul, death, and the unintended consequence of Poppy taking Tawny's soul during healing. They resolve to seek guidance from Sven or Willa to restore Tawny without delay. In Chapter 30, Castile awakens to find Poppy at the glass wall, acting with distant intent. She repeatedly urges him to take her, and they share an intense, uncontrolled sexual encounter by the window, climaxing as she continues staring at the cliffs. The next morning, Poppy works with Nail to adjust her tunic, reflecting on the previous night with blurred memories of intimacy with Castile. Nail explains the embroidery patterns inspired by Atlantean tombs and gods, while Castile and Poppy discuss reports from Kieran and the security of Carcedonia. A horn sounds from the west, signaling danger in the Stroud Sea. Poppy shadow steps with Castile and Kieran to the inner rise, observing a sinking merchant ship and panicked civilians flooding Lower Town. Reports suggest creatures, identified as Siren, extinct god-descended beings, attack the vessel. Poppy senses the unnatural presence of death and Colas in the water. She intervenes, using ether to protect civilians and redirect hazards, then rushes to the docks, confronting the emerging sea creatures. Seahorse-like beings with gilled features, signaling imminent threat. In Chapter 31, Poppy and Castile confront an escalating attack by Siren riding seahorses rising from the Stroud Sea. The undead Sirens swarm the docks and streets of Lower Town, their riders and mounts partially decomposed but lethally strong. Poppy uses ether to strike Siren on the ships, while Castile, Kieran, Malik, Delano, and Sage engage them in the streets, cutting down riders and seahorses with Bloodstone and Shadowstone. Poppy senses Colas' influence in the Karen, but fights back using her essence in tandem with Castile. As the battle intensifies, a massive kraken emerges from the bay, threatening the docks and city. Poppy and Castile struggle to control the ether and protect civilians, summoning Aurelia and unleashing their combined powers. Primal gods Cyan and Rohar appear, with Cyan wielding the kraken and Rohar stabilizing the sea. Lightning, ether, and destructive waves wreak havoc. The Primal God's intervention stops the immediate threat, the Siren are defeated, the Kraken is subdued, and the city begins to stabilize, though massive destruction has occurred. In Chapter 32, Poppy teaches Kieran to heal using the essence, guiding him as he restores an injured mortal's broken leg. Poppy oversees the wounded Atlanteans and mortals brought into a warehouse after the attack on Lower Town, ensuring they receive care without violating the balance of life and death. Exhausted, she resists using her powers on everyone, understanding the strain and risk. Delano, Emile, and Hisa assist, while Castile monitors her, insisting she rest. Poppy uses compulsion to calm and stabilize severely injured individuals, including a man named Harland, removing debris and healing him with other. Castile intervenes, asserting that Kieran can continue the healing while Poppy recovers. Later, in the bedchamber, Poppy and Castile focus on recuperation, with Castile helping her clean up and ensuring she regains strength. Amid intimate moments, they acknowledge the physical and emotional toll of the recent attacks, with both exhausted yet aware of looming threats and the consequences of the Primal God's actions. In Chapter 33, Castile and Poppy are interrupted by Reaver entering the bedchamber. Castile, still under the influence of the ether, reacts instinctively and shifts into a massive cave cat, displaying primal instincts and feral aggression. Poppy calms him using her connection and the Notum, preventing him from attacking Reaver. She observes his transformation and the physical changes, noting his fur, claws, and heightened senses. Castile returns to his human form after Poppy channels the ether to steady him. The two discuss the difficulty of shifting for newly ascended primals, acknowledging the dangerous animalistic side of the power. Reaver confirms he knew Castile could shift. Attention shifts to the imminent arrival of Seraphina, a primal god and Poppy's relative to the mortal realm. Castile and Reaver discuss her potential threat, emphasizing that Poppy's bloodline protects her, but caution remains due to the influence of other primals, including Nyktos and Nektas. Preparations are made to secure Poppy and summon Kieran. In Chapter 34, Castile returns to the chamber and finds Poppy anxious over the imminent arrival of Seraphina, the true primal of life and queen of the gods. Poppy worries about how to behave toward her grandmother, and whether Seraphina will judge her for her ascension or past events. Castile reassures her, explaining that Seraphina's approval was evident in answering his prayers to awaken Poppy from stasis. They discuss Poppy's lineage and the potential scrutiny she faces, calming her fears. Poppy changes into appropriate attire as Reaver and Kieran assist. When Seraphina arrives, her presence is immediately felt through essence and ether, and Poppy observes her striking appearance, noting her resemblance to Millicent. Seraphina addresses the group, initially focusing on Castile and Kieran, and remarks on the primal's embers of life and death, realizing their dominion nature and the unexpected effects of their joining. The chapter closes with the revelation that Rohar, a key figure, is gone. In Chapter 35, Poppy learns from Seraphina about the heroic sacrifice of Rehar and Cyan, who gave their lives to protect the city and realms. Seraphina explains that Rehar belonged to a court she and Noctis created, which safeguarded the mortal realm from catastrophic harm. Poppy confirms the devastation caused by her ascension, which destroyed a realm, and Seraphina reassures her it was not her fault. The discussion shifts to Colas, who has returned and seeks to become the true primal of life and death, gathering supporters from Ascended and Revenants. Poppy realizes she must confront him, as only she, the primal of life and death, has the power to stop him. Seraphina emphasizes the limits of her and Nyktos' intervention in the mortal realm to prevent widespread destruction. They discuss the nature of the Demonian, the role of courts, and the upcoming return of Ats, a primal who will aid them. Finally, Seraphina stresses that Poppy will not face Colas alone, and the need to bring Jadis home before returning to Elysium. In Chapter 36, Poppy, Castile, Seraphina, and Reaver arrive at Ironspire to attempt waking Jades, the Draken who had been entombed. Poppy observes Seraphina's subtle emotional cues and learns about her family connections, including Kin, Attis' twin, who was loyal to Colas and killed by Ats, which tied into Ats aiding them against Colas. Seraphina explains that Poppy's essence as a baby primal of life and death is strong enough to rouse Jadis. The group navigates the hall, noting changes in statues and discussing the abilities and influence of the Fates, including Holland and Aiden. They reach the sunken chamber where Jadis has been entombed, discovering her emaciated, scarred, and malformed from long captivity. Using Poppy's essence under Seraphina's guidance, they begin to awaken her. Jadis reacts with fear and confusion, but gradually recognizes Seraphina's presence and is reassured. Seraphina promises to return Jadis safely to her father, and Reaver leaves, leaving Poppy and Castile to follow. In Chapter 37, Poppy, Castile, and Seraphina return to the sunlit hall after waking Jadis. Poppy reflects on Reaver's despair over Jadis and her own desire to have eased the Draken's suffering. Aurelia delivers a shirt from Reaver and departs to attend to other matters. Poppy and Castile discuss trauma and survival, including Castile's past struggles after captivity, and reaffirm their care for life and each other. Seraphina arrives and explains Poppy's ancestry and the connection to Sotoria. Poppy shares the Miral bloodline and carries embers of life, linking her to the prophecy. Seraphina recounts Sotoria's repeated deaths, Colas' manipulation, and the role of Callum, Colas' first revenant, in storing her soul in the Star Diamond. Isbeth used forbidden magic to create revenants, while Poppy's bloodline was targeted to prevent Sotoria's rebirth. Despite efforts, Poppy is revealed to be the true Sotoria, the primal of blood and bone, integral to the prophecy and central to the coming conflict with Colas. In Chapter 38, Poppy fully processes that she is Sotoria reborn, though her identity is now Penelope Denier. Seraphina confirms she carried Poppy's soul during stasis, allowing the connection between them. Poppy recalls visions of the Cliffs of Sorrow, warnings of Colas, and a gilded cage where Sotoria had been imprisoned. Castile reacts with fury and fear at her revelations, but regains composure, pledging protection. Seraphina explains that while Poppy shares Sotoria's soul, she has her own memories and identity. However, Colas will perceive her as Sotoria. They discuss the vulnerabilities of newly ascended primals. Severe injury or a true primal of death can kill or put them into stasis, and the joining cannot protect against such attacks. Castile vows to stop Colas, but Seraphina warns that if he targets Castile or Kieran, the joining bond won't protect them, emphasizing the threat Colas poses as the true primal of death. In Chapter 39, Castile struggles to process that Poppy is Sotoria reborn, recognizing the danger Colas poses as the true primal of death. He immediately focuses on grounding Poppy, helping her calm her panic and control her breathing. They reaffirm their bond, with Castile promising that neither he, Poppy, nor Kieran will be harmed, despite the threat Colas presents. Seraphina explains that love is a primal's weakness, which Colas could exploit, but Castile reassures Poppy of his protection. They discuss her fragmented memories of Sotoria, the gold cage from stasis, and the threat of Colas detecting her as Sotoria. Amid the tension, Castile emphasizes the need for Poppy to confront her trauma and fear, while asserting that they are strong and unbreakable together. The chapter ends with Poppy and Castile sharing an intimate moment, balancing their emotional vulnerability with reaffirmed trust and mutual commitment as they prepare for the dangers ahead. In Chapter 40, Poppy returns to the vault alone, seeking clarity in space after processing the overwhelming revelations about her past lives, Sotoria, and Colus's obsession. She confronts the wealth and relics stored there, including jewels, coins, and the star diamond, realizing the extent of the hoarding and suffering that produced them. Poppy contemplates her connection to the diamond, recalling how Isbeth showed it to her as a child, and reflects on the manipulations of her mother, Isbeth, and Callum in relation to the prophecy. She recognizes that Colus's obsession will bring death to those she cares about, and survival is not guaranteed, emphasizing her role as the target of his vengeance. Overcome with fear, rage, and grief, she channels her ether to destroy the star, releasing its oppressive energy. Poppy resolves to confront her circumstances with strength and bravery, preparing herself mentally and emotionally for the coming battle against Colus. In Chapter 41, Poppy converses with Delano while waiting for Castile, reflecting on the Cliffs of Sorrow and the Dark Elms, noting their spiritual presence and unnatural energy. Delano confirms his senses of the unnatural align with hers, and they discuss Ian's possible seer abilities and family connections. Poppy reveals the Bloodstone dagger's handle is made from Delano's deceased sister Prila's bone, and he accepts it, acknowledging its significance as a reminder of Victor. Later, Poppy, Castile, Delano, and Malik visit an Ascended household, where they meet several Ascended who bow to Poppy as Queen Penelope and Castile as king. The Ascended explain they no longer participate in the rites, refuse to harm mortals, and were lied to about the true purpose of their ascension and the rites, including the harvesting of blood from third sons and daughters. They assert their independence from the blood crown, revealing that blood is not necessary for survival, but an addictive source of strength, identifying themselves as the Unbound. In Chapter 42, Poppy, Castile, Delano, and Malik continue learning about the Unbound Ascended, who survive by feeding on wild blood instead of mortal blood. They are allowed to meet the sun, but failure to control bloodlust leads to madness and execution, and the Unbound swear an oath to put down those who succumb. About 20% of the 2,000 Ascended in Carcedonia follow this path, guided by the Dissenters, who prioritize freedom and choice over obedience to the Blood Crown. Helena explains that not all Dissenters share this ideology, and Dissenters are dealt with by majority rule. Ian was introduced to the Unbound Way by Millicent, showing an alternative to feeding on mortals. Later, Poppy, Castile, Delano, and Malik confront Lord and Lady Hawley in their mansion, interrupting a sexual encounter. Poppy asserts dominance, demanding answers and declaring her authority as Queen and Primal. Lady Hawley reveals the Blood Queen's plan for Poppy to sit at Colus's side, prompting Poppy to unleash her essence, obliterating Laurel Hawley and subduing her husband. In Chapter 43, Castile convenes the Shadow Council to discuss the Ascended, specifically the Unbound, who survive on beast blood rather than mortal blood. Poppy reminds the group that she offered the Ascended in Oak Ambler a choice to live differently, which they had previously refused due to ignorance. Now, with knowledge of the Unbound, a new choice can be presented. Embrace the Unbound Way or face death. Kieran, Castile, and the Council debate the morality and practicality of offering this choice, weighing public opinion and historical atrocities committed by the Ascended. Poppy emphasizes that those who committed the Blood Crown's cruelest crimes, like the Hawleys, are excluded. The Council agrees to give the Ascended a chance under careful supervision, with Malik leading the effort. Discussion then shifts to Pensdirth, where Poppy wants to act immediately due to her father and Thad's presence. Castile forbids her from going alone, insisting on caution. Reaver reveals he has long known key information, but was sworn to secrecy by Nyktos, explaining the prior lack of transparency. Poppy reassures she won't act recklessly tonight, though she remains concerned about future developments. In Chapter 44, Poppy visits the Cliffs of Sorrow to see if she feels any connection to the place where Sotoria fell. She reflects on her emotions, the essence of life and death, and the threat posed by Colus and the Revenants. While there, Castile finds her using shadow stepping, and they discuss the danger posed to Millicent and Malik if they confront Pensdirth. Castile confirms Malik will remain behind to prevent unnecessary risk, but acknowledges that if Millicent is present, Malik would act regardless. Poppy and Castile then travel to Wayfair, where they find the generals, Emil and Delano, preparing for a briefing. Poppy observes the reactions of the mortals and asserts her authority, ensuring they stand with her rather than beneath her. The group learns that Thad has returned injured, and Poppy's father explains that while escorting Thad's forces to Pensdirth, they encountered fresh Craven, some of whom were citizens transformed, and Thad was injured by a specialized spear. Varys, a powerful god allied with Kholis, confronted them at the city's rise, signaling a major threat ahead. In Chapter 45, Poppy and Castile learn from Valen that Kholis will soon make contact, giving them little time to assess his strength or condition. Poppy emphasizes their advantage with 3 primal gods, noting an additional ancient primal god of war will arrive to aid them, while the Queen of the Gods, an Elysium, will provide limited support. The group discusses preparing for battle, sending scouts and ships to monitor the Bay of Bones and Pensdirth, aware that Kholis and his allied gods could bypass conventional travel. Later, Poppy takes Valen aside to a private area, confronting him about his hidden lineage. Valen reveals he is half Atlantean, the son of a mortal elemental mother, and Elian, a demigod and son of Attis. He cannot fully harness his essence like Castile. They discuss Seti, his bloodline, and previous interventions by Seraphina, the true primal of life, who saved Valine and others during the War of Two Kings. Valine warns that Varys, the god encountered at the Rise, has demanded that Poppy serve Kholis or act beneath him, implying a new threat. In Chapter 46, Castile returns to Wayfair after learning from Valen about his hidden bloodline and the interventions of Seraphina during the War of Two Kings. He reflects on his father's secrecy, his own lineage as a descendant of Ats, and the implications for Poppy, Kieran, and Malik. He considers the threat posed by Kholis and the Craven, noting that Kholis can control them as he once could. Castile encounters Kieran, who has been following him to ensure he handles his emotions, and discusses the revelations with Poppy. He returns to the Solar and finds Poppy in the bath. They engage in a private, intimate moment, reconnecting physically and emotionally. During their encounter, Castile and Poppy share understanding and trust, reinforcing their bond and preparing for the challenges ahead. Amid their intimacy, Castile recalls Kieran's warning that time is running short, hinting at the looming threat of Kholis and the need to act decisively. In Chapter 47, Poppy wakes and moves unconsciously to the Cliffs of Sorrow, sensing a presence near the edge. She discovers a revenant standing among the shadows beneath the elms. Using her strength and essence, she quickly subdues him, hurling him against trees and breaking his arms while seizing his Shadowstone dagger. She impales the revenant with the blade and immobilizes him, noting an eerie flicker in his eyes. Realizing Kholis is controlling or inhabiting the revenant, she addresses him directly, demanding a conversation. Poppy maintains control, aware that she must act decisively before the revenant heals, while also mindful of Castile possibly waking. She asserts dominance and forces Kholis to respond, preparing for the confrontation. The chapter ends with the revenant acknowledging Poppy as Sotoria, confirming Kholis' presence within him and setting the stage for a tense negotiation or battle with the god. In Chapter 48, Poppy confronts the Revenant, insisting he call her Poppy and refusing to be manipulated. The Revenant, possessed by Kholis, taunts her about her past, including Tyrman's abuse, and tries to provoke a reaction. Poppy violently restrains him, snapping his arms and stabbing him with a Shadowstone dagger, asserting control and declaring her intent to kill Kholis. The Revenant recovers partially, attacking her with daggers, but she destroys them and maintains dominance. Attis arrives, intervening silently and assessing the situation, confirming he is not an enemy and that he followed Poppy's essence to ensure Seti was safe. Reaver also arrives, noting the tension and Poppy's actions. Poppy explains to Castile and Attis that she killed the Revenant and neutralized the immediate threat. The chapter ends with Poppy shadow-stepping back to the Solar, frustrated with the men's bickering, consolidating control, and preparing for the coming conflict with Kholis. In Chapter 49, Castile, Kieran, Poppy, Atts, and Reaver convene in the Solar to discuss the upcoming public address and their plans to lay siege to Pensdirth. Atts presses for details about strategy, noting the need to account for the city's defenses, including spears capable of wounding Draken. It's revealed that Draken can bond to different primals, but the true primal of life can override these bonds. Poppy explains that she killed the Revenant Kholis had been using to spy, confirming the immediate threat is neutralized. The group discusses weaponry, including limited Shadowstone capable of wounding gods temporarily. Attis identifies Kholis' vessel Nibarius as a dragon essence, which can only be killed by a powerful primal or by decapitating it, and warns of the danger of approaching Kholis directly. Poppy asserts she must reach Colas to end the conflict. Addis confirms he has seen Poppy before in stasis and knows her past as Satoria, explaining his careful attention to her, but insists he will not harm her. In Chapter 50, Poppy and Castile prepare for the public address at the Sun Temple. Poppy reflects on Atz's past friendship with Satoria, feeling conflicted but focusing on the task at hand. Castile reassures her, and they head to the temple, where the vast cella and high chamber are filled with spectators. As they step onto the balcony, Poppy addresses the crowd, using her ether to calm the people and demonstrate they are not conquerors. The Draken, Aurelia, Neith, and Reaver land around them, their presence amplifying tension. While the crowd kneels in awe, an ominous presence approaches, sensed by both Poppy and Kieran. Atlantean soldiers on Surtian's riderless appear, bearing the crimson royal crest of the Ascended, signaling death. A carriage arrives, and a figure in a deep, crimson gown approaches the temple. When the veil is lifted, it reveals Isbeth, previously thought dead, standing before them, alive and smiling, shocking Poppy, Castile, and Kieran. In Chapter 51, Poppy confronts the shocking sight of Isbeth, her mother, standing alive in the Sun Temple, despite Poppy having killed her. Overwhelmed by disbelief and rage, Poppy channels her ether, preparing to strike, but realizes the crowd is not afraid of Isbeth. The fear is hers alone. Guided by Valen and Atz, Poppy suppresses the destructive impulse, controlling her essence to avoid harming the mortals. She forces Isbeth to walk ahead, keeping her under control while entering the temple with Atz. Inside, Castile and Kieran observe silently as Isbeth acknowledges them, revealing that she was resurrected by the true king, not as a mortal, but through unknown means, and warns that failure to meet Colas' demands by noon will result in the city's destruction. Poppy, Castile, Kieran, and Malik discuss the impossibility and implications of Isbeth's return, acknowledging that only by confronting her can they confirm whether it truly is Isbeth. In Chapter 52, Poppy, Castile, Kieran, Addis, and Malik discuss the imminent meeting with Colas. Poppy wants to confront him alone to protect Castile and Kieran, aware that any interference could put them at risk. Addis explains that Elysium's wards prevent unauthorized entry, meaning only she or someone born there can enter, and dropping them could allow Colas access. Thorn, a Fate, had previously intervened to prevent them from entering improperly, showing the dangers of breaching these barriers. The group considers Colas' power, noting he has been fed for centuries and could be near full strength. They acknowledge the presence of a Fate will regulate the meeting, though protections may not extend to Castile and Kieran since they were not summoned. Poppy insists on going, fully aware that any disruption could trigger harm and that she may be put in stasis. The chapter ends with tension over trust, control, and Poppy's ability to survive the encounter. In Chapter 53, Poppy confronts the consequences of asking Kieran to promise to step in if she lost control under Colas' influence. Castile realizes what she had done and challenges her decisions, revealing his frustration and fear for her safety. Poppy explains her actions were meant to protect him and Kieran, not to undermine them, acknowledging the risk and her mistake in keeping it secret from Castile. The discussion highlights the deep trust and emotional tension between Poppy, Castile, and Kieran, emphasizing her role as the true primal of life and death. Poppy asserts she will face Colas alone, accepting the danger, and focuses on summoning a Fate for assistance. Thorn, a Fate, appears in response to her call, agreeing to prevent Castile from following her to Penstirth without harming him, but requests a favor in return. Poppy consents, understanding the necessity to ensure Castile's safety while she confronts Colas. In Chapter 54, Poppy prepares for her mission against Colas with Attas, Valen, and Reaver. They finalize plans. Reaver and Aurelia will fly ahead to Penstirth, and Poppy will meet Colas in the Great Hall at 10 to noon. Atz provides guidance on what to expect, including potential destruction, shockwaves, and intervention from the Fates, and helps Poppy arrange a forearm sheath for Seraphina's dagger. She ensures Castile and Kieran remain behind for their safety. Before departing, Poppy entrusts Malik with letters to deliver to Tawny and Millicent in case she doesn't return, emphasizing the importance of their safety. As the time approaches, she destroys a statue of Colas in the Great Hall to release her anger and resolve. Delano and Kieran support her, and finally, Castile appears unexpectedly. Despite the tension and risk, they share a fierce emotional reunion, reaffirming their bond as Poppy steels herself to face Colas. In Chapter 55, Poppy and Atz shadow step into Pensdirth, sensing the overwhelming presence of death and the devastation Colas has wrought. The city is eerily lifeless, the streets empty, grass gray, and hundreds of bodies float in the bay. Approaching Seacliff Manor, Poppy steels herself for the confrontation, hiding her bone dagger and compartmentalizing her thoughts of Castile. Atz warns her to avoid acting recklessly and confirms he will protect her. They enter the manor, noting the horrific scene, bodies hanging from the colonnade, signs of Colas' cruelty, and a small group of gods and revenants. Poppy and Atz confront Colas in the Great Hall, where he mocks her and tests her resolve. She asserts her control, maintains her stance, and rejects his attempts at intimidation. When Colas escalates, Poppy strikes him with the bone dagger, wounding him. Attis immediately intervenes, and Poppy summons the Ether, opening a tear to Elysium, escaping Colas' reach and leaving him behind. In Chapter 56, Castile isolates himself in the Solar, anxious about Poppy's actions in Pensdirth, and frustrated by his inability to intervene. He reflects on her daring and realizes she has prevented him from shadow-stepping to her, likely with the aid of a fate. While drinking whiskey unsuccessfully to calm himself, he notices changes in the Great Hall, the melted thrones and Poppy's destruction of a statue. Delano and Kieran are present, monitoring him, though he struggles with their interference and his own anger. He identifies the bloodstone dagger, recognizing its significance. Tension escalates as Castile and Kieran clash verbally and physically, revealing their unresolved emotions and competitive instincts. Amid insults and provocation, Castile engages in a brief, controlled fight with Kieran. Suddenly, he experiences a wave of dizziness, severe chest pain, and physical disorientation, signaling an acute, unexplained physical or magical reaction, leaving him unable to remain standing and slipping into unconsciousness. In Chapter 57, Poppy is struck by intense pain after attacking Colas, collapsing to the floor with burns and bruises. Her body is immobilized and she struggles to breathe, sensing the charred remnants of her own flesh from the impact of the essence she unleashed. Attis lies nearby, gravely wounded. Colas approaches, mocking her and asserting control over the situation, demonstrating his resilience despite the dagger strike. He threatens her, revealing his intent to kill Castile and Kieran afterward. Poppy fights to regain control, using the remnants of her essence and the memory of Castile to anchor herself, summoning strength and focus. Colas continues feeding on her, his fangs embedded, paralyzing her limbs. She refuses to submit emotionally, clinging to her love for Castile. As she concentrates on him, she senses a powerful presence approaching, associated with lilacs, citrus, and cold energy. A tall, armored figure and a bright furred wolf, before her vision fades, leaving the chapter on the brink of confrontation. In Chapter 58, Castile wakes on his back under the dome's ceiling, noticing dark clouds and fissures in the glass and walls. His father Delano and Hisa confirm he passed out for about 10 minutes during a significant earthquake, which caused some damage to the western tower. Castile recalls tackling Kieran and feeling dizzy, chest hollow, and tingling in his palm. He checks his hand to see the golden swirl from the marriage imprint still present but dulled. Concerned, he asks Kieran if he felt dizzy. Kieran confirms he's fine, aside from a sore jaw. The trio processes the aftermath of the earthquake and the strange effects on Castile, indicating that Poppy must have intervened and that something extraordinary occurred, though its full scope remains unclear. The chapter ends with Castile grasping the oddity of the dulled imprint and sensing that Poppy's fate is tied to whatever just transpired. In Chapter 59, Castile senses that something has happened to Poppy and fears for her safety. Despite attempts to locate her mark using the essence, he cannot sense her, indicating she is missing or hidden. A presence of extreme cold and power fills the Great Hall as the sky darkens and crimson lightning strikes. Colas arrives, using his influence to make mortals and Wolven fall to their deaths. Castile witnesses the carnage. Hisa, Lizeth, Delano, and his father are all killed, leaving him enraged and desperate. Unable to find Poppy, he channels his rage and essence into his body, causing his flesh to partially transform into bone and sprout wings. Black, vine-like ether spreads across the hall, sealing the doors and trapping the fallen. Ravens pour in as the power within him rises. Castile realizes a primal, devastating force within himself has awakened, prepared to unleash wrath and destruction across the land. In Chapter 60, Kieran arrives at Wayfair and is met by his father. They survey the destruction of the Inner Rise, noting the shattered walls, ruined manors, and black, icy vines that cover the castle. Kieran reports that Netta is inside and safe, and confirms that Poppy was taken to Elysium, where she is injured but alive. The courtyard and castle show extensive damage from the recent events, reflecting the fury of the forces involved. As they enter the Hall of Gods, Kieran notices the thick living vines crawling across the floor, walls, and columns, intertwined with ice and mist. Ravens fill the dome's ceiling, adding to the ominous atmosphere. Inside, Addis stands uninjured, while Castile sits atop a throne made from bones and darkened by black vines. His face is altered, partly shadow and partly silver bone, with golden eyes streaked with dark crimson. Kieran recognizes that Castile has transformed into the primal god of death and destruction,